The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream. Change has come to America.
Believe it.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
Industry about the availability of these
Would the senator yield?
Jeopardizing the long-term investments necessary for the development of these biofuels. I hope the next time I get a chance to have the floor, I won't be interrupted. I yield the floor and put the rest of my statement in the record.
Cranky. Very cranky.
Mr. President.
Leader McConnell.
I've just had an opportunity to speak with President Trump.
Oh, no.
And I would say to all my colleagues, has indicated he's prepared to sign the bill.
Okay.
He will also be issuing a national emergency declaration at the same time. And I've indicated to him that I'm going to support the national emergency declaration. So for all of my colleagues, the President will sign the bill. We'll be voting on it shortly. And with that, I ask the chair to lay before the Senate the conference report to accompany House Joint Resolution 31.
You're fired.
I asked the conference to have Mitch McConnell laid before the committee. Oh, that just happened. That just happened. This is breaking. So you may or may not know that the Senate is currently voting on the bill that was agreed to in the conference committee between the House and the Senate, right? They have the identical bills, the Senate, the House. These are the bills that would give the president $1.4 billion and get him to, not declare, fund the government so that, because DHS and other parts of the government will run out of money tomorrow at midnight. Okay, so that's why it's so important, and this is why I've been telling you all week long that something's going to happen, at least by Friday. So today is Thursday. Here we are, right on time. Never an egg timer around when you need one, but if I had one, I'd always be, right on time. So the Senate is voting right now on that bill. The House will vote on that bill tonight at 6:30. The only reason why the House is delaying the vote on the bill is because today is the funeral of the longest-serving House member, John Dingell of Michigan, of Dearborn, Michigan. And so they will vote tonight at 6:30. Now, what Mitch McConnell just interrupted cranky-ass Charles Grassley for is to tell his Senate compatriots, his fellow enablers, that Donald Trump is going to sign this bill. And he's going to do exactly what I told you I would do. Didn't I tell you? Didn't I tell you over and over again? If I were him, this is what I'd do. If I were a greedy little mofo, if I wanted to somehow feed the maggots, if I wanted to somehow placate, Al-Qaeda, the base, if I wanted to have something I could tweet to these maggots, I would sign the bill and take whatever money was appropriated for border security. And then I would turn around and I would declare a freaking national emergency and see where I could steal money from places that Congress didn't appropriate it for a wall. Okay? I would look to see, could I steal money from disaster relief? Could I steal money from flood projects? Could I steal money from military housing? And that is exactly what the president has communicated to Mitch McConnell that he's going to do. Now, this is going to trigger a chain of events. Here's the key thing you got to remember throughout all this, because it's going to go on for 2 freaking weeks now. 2 weeks. Checks and balances. Checks and balances. 3 co-equal branches of government. The executive branch, the President of the United States. The legislative branch, the Congress, the Senate. The judiciary, the court system, all of it. Here is what is going to happen if the president decides that he's going to not be his lazy-ass, executive time-loving, TV-watching, I need to go golfing self. And he decides that he's going to lose in 2020. He's going to get primaried for 2020 if he doesn't deliver to these maggots, if he doesn't deliver to the MAGA people, this wall, this ridiculous wall, and steals money from the the military. Yesterday, I swear to you, there was a hearing yesterday in the Senate about the state of military housing, that it's falling apart, that the ceilings are literally caving in on soldiers' families. The ceilings are falling down. The walls are full of black mold, okay? And so money was appropriated to fix this. What's her name? From Arizona, the one, Martha McSally, okay? The one that didn't win anything but was appointed, right, to take McCain's seat after Sinema won in the election. Martha McSally got the sloppy seconds after John McCain passed away. She got that second Senate seat. She was taking testimony yesterday about this. And, she was a commander. Martha McSally is a military person. And she was livid. And she said that the state of military housing in this country is disgusting, quote, I quote her, and that we need to be able to poke people in the chest. These are her words. I didn't pull it because I just didn't realize this was a place where the president was going to go get money. But she was saying you need to poke somebody who's in charge of this, a base commander or somebody at Joint Chiefs, and poke them in the chest and tell them this has to be fixed. Our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our Marines cannot live like this. It is disgusting. It is a disgrace. Now, I remember base housing and I remember military housing, and they were both pretty vile. Because you don't make a whole lot of money, so what you can afford if you live in off base to get out of the military, barracks or the military housing, you got to use your own salary. People flee, they go, man, because it's so freaking bad. And we're talking about the 80s, okay? The freaking 80s. That's when I was there. Oh, geez. So now I know that the president's going to raid that fund that has been appropriated for military housing. You know how you always hear these news people, say things like, there's money in the Department of Defense that's been appropriated for construction, but it hasn't been deployed yet. This is how they put it. You know what they're talking about? They're talking about the money for military housing. What, did you think they were going to build bases all over this? No, that's what the money is from. He's looking to take money from California for their flood projects, and he's looking to take disaster money from Texas, oh my God, from Harvey, and from California, the campfires, and the Panhandle in Florida, and reprogram it with his awesome, newly found appropriation powers that he's going to take unto himself to steal that money. So, okay, here's what's going to happen immediately upon signing the spending bill and declaring a national emergency if he does do this. Like I said, he's super freaking lazy. He doesn't like to work. This is the best, the best thing we got going for us. Now, I heard people on the TV steal that idea from me, which I tweeted out about a week ago. Fine, keep saying it. Keep on repeating it, because it is the best thing we got going for us, is that the president is uber lazy. But if he decides that he feels like, declaring a national emergency, I don't know, I guess he'll delegate it now to our newly confirmed Attorney General. Bob Barr just got confirmed this morning. He's the new Attorney General of the United States. Now, here's what will happen. The Department of Justice should, if it's operating properly, should immediately move to bring a case to a court, hopefully the Supreme Court, arguing that the president has declared a national emergency without the presence of a national emergency. The Solicitor General would be in charge of arguing that case. The Solicitor General is somebody that actually they were considering for Attorney General. You know his name now. His name's Noel Francisco. He would be tasked with arguing against this national emergency. All right, so that's one avenue. The other thing that you can see, you will probably be able to see on C-SPAN at least, is Nancy Pelosi in the House. Nancy Pelosi, if the president declares a national emergency, will immediately, I mean, if not sooner, I'm telling you, this is, I don't know what her schedule looks like. But immediately, pretty fast, would introduce a joint resolution declaring an end to the president's declared national emergency. And that'll pass the House because we have a majority there. But it's a joint resolution. So, of course, that grenade goes over to the Senate. This is what we were talking about yesterday. And I'm sure you couldn't figure out why I was talking about it yesterday. But now you know why I was talking about it yesterday, because today is the day. And at the very least, the day was going to be tomorrow. And it might still be tomorrow. Because, the president, if they're not voting the House until 6:30, he might miss Sean Hannity if he's not free by 9 o'clock. So I don't know if it's today or tomorrow. It just depends on how much good TV there is tonight. Seriously.
It's Valentine's Day, isn't it? Melania's night?
Oh, freaking Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. I totally forgot. I'm so sorry. Happy VD. Happy VD. I'm on massive doses of doxycycline. So, doesn't even scare me to say VD. I mean, nothing can happen to me. I'm impenetrable. I'm freaking iron. Let's have at it, Howard. Bette Midler tweeted a good one. She said, tonight is Valentine's Day, so it's the night that my husband and I decide to go to bed and either have sex or take a nap. To be decided. But, okay, here's what happened. So Nancy introduces the joint resolution to declare an end to the president's emergency. That goes over to the Senate, forcing the Senate. A clock will begin ticking. See, it won't happen immediately in the Senate. The clock starts ticking on the joint resolution. A joint resolution has to be voted on once it's passed out of one chamber, okay, one House or Senate. And so Mitch McConnell has absolutely no ability to deny it a vote. Just none. He has no say in it, which is why it's such a good weapon. Because, Mitch decides to vote on what he wants to vote on, and he decides not to vote on Merrick Garland. Right? You know that. So it starts a clock. 15 days. The Senate has to have a vote on that joint resolution. Now, of course, it'll happen in their, I'm guessing their Judiciary Committee, and then it has to be voted out of their Judiciary Committee and onto the floor. The thing to watch is whether or not they try to, not have a vote on it. And the reason why is because that vote would clearly show which senators are absolute abject lunatics and see an emergency on the southern border that no one else sees, that no one else reports on, that there's no death, there's no murder, there's no nothing. Nothing is going on. This is not 9/11. This is not Katrina. This is not the Camp Fire. This is not anything. This is a very low number of people entering through the southern border for the United States. It's pretty typical, but it's pretty low as well. So there is no national emergency. But this will force those senators to go on the record saying that if Donald Trump says he sees something, that they see it too, or force them to vote against their own president. So that's kind of what the breaking news is. Mitch McConnell interrupted cranky-ass Charles Grassley to go out on the Senate floor and tell us this. So it's in his head that, oh no, a bill from the House is coming our way, and I'm supporting the national emergency.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
What's your reaction? Mitch McConnell just went to the Senate floor. He said he spoke to the president. The president's inclined to sign it, but he's going to declare a national emergency simultaneously. Do you think that's the right plan?
No, I do not. I think declaring a national emergency where there is no national emergency is not good for the president to do. And frankly, I don't think it's good for a precedent for future presidents. I think a lot of Republicans share that view.
Quickly before I let you go, do you think there are other issues and priorities in the country more deserving of a national emergency declaration than what's going on at the border?
I do, but more importantly, the Director of National Intelligence, former Republican Senator from Indiana, Coates, who the president appointed as the Director of National Intelligence to tell him where are the crisis areas in the country. He did so just about a few days ago, a week ago, and he did not mention the southwest border at all as being either an emergency or a challenge. Now, I think it is a challenge. I think we need to have secure borders, but it is not. It is not a national emergency.
I'll tell you what is a national emergency, and this is a great day to point it out. A year ago today, there was a mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School here in Florida, in Parkland, which is right down the road, from us. It is an upper middle class neighborhood. It was not immune from somebody going in there and shooting up their school. The numbers of people who have died in this country and who die every year in this country from gunshots, either intended or not intended or suicide, etc., are astronomical. They are in the tens of thousands regularly, year in, year out. 33,000 this year. Kids killed. We have all these, and nobody wants to discuss it, and nobody wants to talk about. How the president? Immigration is costing us billions. I tell you. Well, obviously it's exactly backwards because he's the president. The exactly backwards part is that. People that work here with these not temporary, but who work here with not Social Security cards, but with TIN, temporary numbers, they pay billions of dollars in taxes that they will never reap the benefits of. They pay FICA taxes, payroll taxes, right? And it goes into the Treasury, and they will never take it out because they don't have documents. They're not entitled. And so it's exactly the opposite of what he says. However, the gun issue is exactly something he said he wanted to address. After Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, this man is just such a front-running phony. It's like in the heat of the moment. He talked about background checks. He talked about, all kinds of, maybe he'll ban bumps, maybe he'll do this, maybe he'll do that. Seriously.
We have to pursue common sense measures that protect the rights of law-abiding Americans while keeping guns. And we have to keep the guns out of the hands of those that pose the threat.
He's reading.
And this really includes background checks. And I know, Senator, that you're working on things. Joe, I know you're working. And I'm looking at a number of the folks around the table. You're working on different bills. We have to get them done. We have to get them done. And they have to be strong. The background checks, hey, look, I'm the biggest fan of the Second Amendment. Many of you are. I'm a big fan of the NRA, but I had lunch with them, with Wayne and Chris and David on Sunday, and said, it's time. We got to stop this nonsense. It's time.
And nothing happened. Nothing. So, here are the facts. We have not had a hearing on gun safety, I think, since 2004. It's we haven't had one hearing on gun safety in this country, not even a hearing. Talk about legislation and background checks and common sense solutions and maybe a ban on military style weapon. No, nothing. Not even a hearing until yesterday. This is why elections have consequences, they like to say. This is why it was so important. One of the reasons why it's so important. And also, with this national emergency, you're going to see, and the Russia investigation, you're going to see that the House now has the power to check the president, where before you even have a debate or a hearing or anything, they just decide we're with the president, just like Mitch McConnell just did when he interrupted cranky-ass Charles Grassley, to come out on the floor and tell his members, the president's going to sign this bill, we're going to vote on it, and then the president's going to declare a national emergency, and I support him. Code, I support him, you will too. I support him, you will too, or I will primary your ass. Okay? Senate's got to stay on the side of the it's just so bizarre. It's so bizarre. And, there are some Republicans over there that are not going to be too keen to give the president all this authority in a national emergency environment. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, how they vote. However, the real national emergency, obviously, is guns in this country. Guns. And he never talks about the cost of gun violence. We don't know what the true cost of gun violence is in America. You know why we don't? Because anytime any part of government tries to study the actual cost of gun violence in America, the NRA comes in and threatens them with a primary or with a challenge or with withholding of their large-ass money-wise, a massive advertising campaign against them for which they will not have the money to respond. And so we don't know exactly how many billions of dollars it costs us when somebody is shot. We don't know. I will tell you, though, there's a beautiful article in Mother Jones today. I'm going to play you a little bit of their report. It's not very long, but they'll explain it to you, what the real cost to you, the taxpayer, is for all this freaking gun violence if I can't make you care about, sixth graders.
What does gun violence in America really cost? Let's start with the human toll. Guns kill 33,000 Americans a year and injure 80,000. From police and hospitals to families and communities, what does it all cost? We've gathered the data in a groundbreaking investigation. The total price tag? $229 billion a year. That's $55 billion more than Apple's worldwide revenue in 2012. More than what obesity costs the country, and almost as much as we spend on Medicaid. First, there's $8.6 billion in total direct costs. Look at the average price of a single gun murder.
Yeah.
There is emergency response, healthcare, courts, prison, totaling $441,000. We pay for 32 of these gun homicides every single day. And direct costs are just the beginning. Now add what economists call indirect costs. $49 billion in victims' lost wages and productivity. $169 billion in lost quality of life. What if the toll was split among every man, woman, and child? More than $700 per American every year.
That's brilliant to do it this way, to break it down. Here you have a president screaming about a national emergency of brown people, haggard Honduran housewives and their toddlers coming across the border and taking unto himself this enormous, ginormous power away from Congress to himself to appropriate money for something that has no prayer of stopping anything that you might care about, okay, which should be drugs, because they come through the legal ports of entry. Claims of asylum, can't stop that because that's completely and utterly legal in this country. President tried to change that. Court said no. So we don't have an emergency, okay? We just don't. But the gun thing is an emergency. The gun thing is costing us billions of dollars in direct costs and multiple billions of dollars in indirect costs. I mean, $229 billion in direct costs for emergency response, for health care, for trying to save somebody's life. Then the cost of putting somebody, the shooter, if you catch them, on trial, and then housing them in a prison. Those are the direct costs. And then the indirect costs are things like, let me just give you a name to attach to the story. This is a beautifully written article, I have to say. It's called The True Cost of Gun Violence in America. It is a Mother Jones article, and it is in the homework today if you go to randyrhodes.com, and you can follow along. It starts like this. It was a mild, crystal clear desert evening on November 15th, 2004, when Jennifer Longden and her fiancé, David Ruckert, closed up his martial arts studio and headed out to grab some carnitas tortas from a nearby taqueria. And they were joking and chatting about wedding plans, and the local Japanese garden seemed perfect for their conversation. And so they were going over there. I'm just going to shorthand it. And then a red truck with oversized tires and tinted windows sideswiped theirs, and they stopped to get out. And as Mr. Ruckert, I'll just call him David, started to get out of his car, his window exploded. He told his girlfriend, get down, and he reached for his handgun inside his cooler on his truck's cab's floor. He threw the truck into gear, and the other person in the big red truck fired 2 more shots, and suddenly his words turned into gibberish. He slumped forward. He had his foot on the gas. and he hit a concrete divider. Meanwhile, his girlfriend gets shot in the back, and she said it felt like a bolt of lightning. Her whole body became a live wire, and her slumped over boyfriend still has his foot on it, and they bam into a concrete divider. The airbag deploys. She's inside of the cab. She manages to call 911. They ask her, where are you shot? She says, I don't know. I can't move. I can't breathe anymore. Somebody help me. I'm dying. And then she said she felt a rush of cool air and she knew somebody was standing over her. And then the bright lights she could see. She asked, am I being medevaced? The EMT says, no, those are the news vultures. Nice. And then shields her face. Half her ribs were shattered. Her lungs had collapsed. They were filling with blood. The ambulance screams towards the hospital. She was a scuba diver, so she was very used to having a regulator. You know, I know how to. My dad was a certified master scuba diver, and I know how to scuba dive too. I don't do it anymore, but so she's clawing at the oxygen mask, and she's saying out loud, "My regulator isn't working. My regulator isn't working." And you know, anyway, they get her to the hospital. And they have to intubate her. They put a tube through her rib cage to, you know, drain the blood out of her freaking lungs. The doctor keeps saying to her, I'm really fast. I'm going to do this as quickly as I can. The nursing staff had to hold her down. And she remembers hearing a dog wailing in the background. And she remembers saying, why, you know, to herself, because she couldn't talk at this point. But she remembers saying to herself, my God, why is there a dog in the ER? And then later on, she realizes it was her. She heard herself wailing. She said, I realized it wasn't a dog. It was me. Okay, so a couple days later, she's laying in the hospital bed. Okay, she doesn't die. The doctor comes in and calmly says to her, you are a T4 paraplegic. You will no longer be able to move your body from the middle of your chest down. Your boyfriend survived as well, but the bullet went through his brain. He is profoundly cognitively impaired, and he will need round-the-clock care. You want to run the bills on her? You want to do it? They did. Mother Jones did. They ran the bills. This woman faced complete and total financial ruin, which was particularly galling because she was an IT person. She made $80,000 a year, and she had a side business going of massage therapists, okay? So she was completely independent. She was looking to get married to this to this man, David. They were going to start their new lives together, and in a split second, and here's the kicker to the story. No arrest was ever made. They have no idea who did this. But it cost her, she was hospitalized for such a long period of time after the shooting, and her health care provider, her insurance carrier, found a way to drop her by saying she had a pre-existing condition. So her insurance no longer covered her. So guess what? All her bills now are paid by Medicaid and Medicare, a combination of the two, which we pay for, obviously. And it has cost her $1 million in the first year. Just in the first year, $1 million. She had to declare bankruptcy, obviously, and now she qualifies for Medicaid and Medicare. Over the past 10 years, she has been hospitalized at least 20 more times. One time, she fell out of her wheelchair because she's on her own. And one time, she fell out of her wheelchair and she broke major bones in both of her legs. She almost had to have them amputated. Instead, they were able to insert titanium rods in her legs. She doesn't feel anything, right? Because she's a T4 paraplegic. In 2013, she was admitted 5 more times for sepsis, which is an infection that brings you right to the edge of death there. She had a fever so bad that her heart stopped, and she had taken so many antibiotics along the way that they didn't even work. Her income is Social Security disability, pays her about $2,000 a month. If you do the math on that over 10 years, it's about $250,000 that we have to supplement her because she cannot work. And here's a young girl Here's a young girl who was making 80 grand, 14, 15 years ago, had her whole life ahead of her, and now her life has to be subsidized by the taxpayer because she can't. She just can't. She's unable. She's disabled. She's paralyzed. All because, and this is one person. So now you realize 32 people a day are shot in America, 32 each day, every day. If it's $1 million a year to save their lives, never mind the ongoing cost of lost wages, never mind the ongoing cost of, follow-up care or round-the-clock care, or losing their ability to make a living and going on disability, or going on Medicaid, Medicare, a combination if they can, because their health insurance carriers decided to drop them. I mean, so how much is it? How much is it? We don't know, because every time we try to do the math, the NRA threatens the doctors, threatens the National Institutes of Health, threatens the Department of Homeland Security from doing this research. But what we know is that this girl was one of at least 750,000 Americans injured by gunshots over the last 10 years.
To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844.
561-270-3844. Okay, so today we remember the students who have become activists, which is, kudos to them at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, who were the victims of a school shooting. I told you that I was looking at Twitter yesterday, and I saw a mother who was just shaken to her roots because they had an active shooter drill in the school where her, fifth grader goes, and on the fifth grader's arm was written, "I love you, Daddy." And when her daughter came home, she said, "Why is that on your arm?" She said, "We had an active shooter drill, and I just wanted Daddy to know if I died, that I loved him." And then the kid just broke down wailing. I mean, the trauma that we put these kids through so that the NRA could have its way with our legislators and the Russians, and God only knows where all that money comes from. It's just, it's a mind-blowing thing. And that these kids are willing to take on this well-moneyed lobby is just, to their credit. And, it's so amazing how you could be consumed with this story a year ago today and for maybe 2 weeks after, and then it just, goes away. It goes away. But what I told Scott today, you never let a story go. You just keep the story, and as you get details, you fill in the blanks that you didn't know then so that you can explain the result. Or you can, it's the same thing with Andy McCabe. He's got a book out now that I didn't even know he was writing. Did you? I had no idea, but he wrote a book about these 8 days in May after Comey was fired, and it's called The Threat. So we'll read an excerpt of that for you, in the next hour. But I don't want to leave this alone, because what is amazing is that this woman who I told you about, who was shot, whose care cost about $1 million in the first year, has estimated that her care in the last 10 years has cost $5 million. The actual number of people in the last 10 years who have been injured and requiring, this kind of care, and this isn't even talking about the trauma counseling or the in-home care or the wheelchairs or the customized van or the lost income. I mean, she estimates that all that put together in the last 10 years is about $5 million. So now you have 750,000 people who are injured in this way by gunshot. And then you got another 320,000 over the last 10 years who have been actually killed by guns in this country. That's 1 million people right there. And then you got 20,000 more who commit suicide, and guns don't even give a chance for intervention because they're so completely effective that 20,000 people die of suicide by gunshot. So you got 1.2 million people, and the president is sitting there telling you there's some sort of an emergency because there's 4,000 Honduran housewives with their toddlers down at the border, and this we should spend billions and billions of dollars on. This is a twisted set of priorities. Just absolutely ass backwards, upside down, like through the looking glass, up is down, black is white, and we don't know where we are anymore, Alice. Holy crap. It's Jabberwocky. This is Lewis Carroll at his stonedest. I'm guessing this is LSD time. This is just so unbelievable. Unbelievable. Sad, sick. So let me introduce you to a new member of the House of Representatives. Her name is Lucy Bath. She is a newly elected. She just won in this past November's sweep of the House. Her name is Lucy Bath, and her son was killed. He would have been 24 years old yesterday by a gunshot.
7 years ago, my son was violently torn from my life, a victim of gun violence, a victim of a person who had a gun who should never have received one. Today, I join my colleagues and former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords to prevent more families from facing the horror and heartbreak wrought by gun violence. I am honored to co-sponsor this bipartisan legislation for my son Jordan and for the safety of every family in this country.
We have our first piece of gun legislation. We have our very first piece of gun legislation. Now, what makes her so incredible? She was a flight attendant before she was a congresswoman. She was a flight attendant. She lives in Georgia. She lives in Newt Gingrich's old district. This woman holds Newt Gingrich's seat, and I can't think of a more beautiful, beautiful, poetic justice. I can't. So she was interviewed last night about why she's doing that we haven't had a hearing on nothing. And I mean, you're talking about the things that have happened in this country. Oh, my God. Louisiana, by the way, has the highest gun homicide rate in the nation. The cost for everyone who lives in Louisiana per capita, the cost to your household in Louisiana for these crazy, lack of gun laws is $1,300 per person. So if you got $1,000 back this year in beer money from Trump's tax cut, you're still in the hole for $300 for the gun violence that you have to cover. Wyoming, you got a small population, but you have the highest overall rate of gun deaths. And you have the highest suicide rates in the country. Who would have known, right? Florida and Texas, here in Florida, we outpace California and New York in the cost and the number of gun deaths. Woohoo! So this woman was a flight attendant, and her son was killed in gun violence by somebody who should never have had a gun. And if there were a background check, apparently she believes that this person never would have had access to a gun. Okay? And now she sits in Newt Gingrich's seat.
This was Newt Gingrich's district that you won this campaign in. It was a squeaker. It was close. But you didn't shy away from this issue. How did you appeal? You had to appeal to Republican voters. How did you do that?
Well, I think that as a mother, there are families all over the country, and most specifically in my district, that they're very concerned about their children coming home and talking about their lockdown drills. Mm-hmm. And that I think that every person that I appealed to understood that that could also be their plight as well, that there are no safe spaces in the country, that gun violence is, apparently everywhere, and that I, as a victim, could speak great credibility as to wanting to really keep them safe, why it's important to do so.
What advice do you have for Democrats, especially Democrats now running for president, about how to speak to Republican voters? Because you had to convert Republican voters in your district, some Republican voters, to vote Democrat, probably some of them for the first time in their lives.
Well, basically, I just told my story. I had been a single mother, so I understood when we had that recession after September 11, and I took a hefty pay cut. So I could speak very credibly to the fact that I had to decide what I could or could not afford to do anymore, and still be able to make it every day. Having been a two-time breast cancer survivor, I understand what it means to make sure that people have affordable health care and that people with pre-existing conditions like myself have the ability to have, good treatment without high cost of that treatment. So my own lived experiences afforded me to be the face of the very thing that people in my district and around the nation are concerned about every single day.
How do you do it? And by this I mean, how do you deal with the grief, which I'm sure is still there, of the loss of your son, something you didn't want to live to, you didn't want to be here, none of us do, and how do you live with that every day going forward?
I live with my grief by making sure that I'm fighting as hard as I can for the people that I live and work among every single day. For me, that is how I manage my grief, to put myself forth for the sake of others, which is exactly what I was trying to teach my son to do as a human being.
Yeah, just like Donald Trump. It's the same guiding principle in his life, right? This is an amazing person, and I'm so glad that she is a part of the House of Representatives, because I will tell you, Congress has not passed one single national gun control measure at all. And this is after Sandy Hook. This is after Aurora. This is after the Pulse nightclub shooting. This is after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. This is, Las Vegas. I mean, not one. All they do, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers. Not one. But here's the good news. 26 states have passed new gun laws. 11 states passed new laws to keep firearms out of the hands of domestic abusers, guys who beat their wives. California, Kansas, Louisiana, Maryland, New York, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Utah, Vermont, and Washington all passed. Now, without, a comprehensive background check, not sure. Okay, but 9 states, including the District of Columbia, passed new restrictions on bump stocks and other trigger activators. California, Connecticut, D.C., Delaware, Florida, Hawaii, Maryland, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Washington State. 9 states passed laws to fund violence reduction programs. California, Connecticut, Florida, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Nebraska, New York, and Rhode Island. And you might say to yourself, why Connecticut? Why? That's Sandy Hook. Okay, those are the Sandy Hook parents. Which, of course, the lunatic right wing, the Roger Stones, the Jerome Corseys, the Alex Jones, who all, managed to, out YouTube everybody. They're child actors. They didn't really die. They're actors. This is crisis actors. This didn't really happen. All to protect the National Rifle Association. All to protect freaking Wayne LaPierre and those Russian, lover. I mean, Bolton, did a message for the Russians. John Bolton. Oh, so sick. Anyway, 7 states passed new or improved background check laws. Thank God. Florida is one of them. Louisiana. I told you Louisiana, you have so much gun violence. It's crazy. Wyoming, you need this too, but you're not one of them. But Florida did, Louisiana did, New Jersey did, Oregon, Tennessee, and Washington. And 5 states tightened concealed carry laws. California, Maryland, New Jersey, South Dakota, and Washington. Florida raised the minimum age to own a gun from 18 to 21. You also have to be 21 in California, in Vermont, and in Washington State. So the states are taking it seriously. Some states, half the states, are taking it somewhat seriously. The federal government, nothing. Zero, zip, goose egg, squat, donut, nada, nothing. Not one single piece of gun legislation. Nothing. I think there was some sort of a ban on bump stocks or something, but nothing for background checks, nothing, for spousal abusers, drug addicted people, known alcoholic. Like, if you have 2 DUIs, should you be allowed? I mean, and they won't even, people who are on the terrorist watch list, they won't even ban them from buying. This is a very sick country, I have to say, and it's completely owned and operated by various PACs, various political action committees and lobby shops and associations and, so much money in the system that keeps us from having laws that are common sense, absolute no-brainers. If you're a domestic violence, if you're a batterer, if you've gotten, caught torturing animals, you're probably a sociopath, okay? If you are a drug-addicted, drug-addled, repeat offender, you don't have the wherewithal to make good decisions, okay? You just don't. If you're in an anger management class, you just don't make good decisions. You understand that, right? If you're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, just get the care you need. Don't worry about gun ownership at this point, okay? You got police. They'll come. They'll protect you. This whole system is ass backwards. But here you have a president, I swear to God, who is probably some sort of a owned operative of a foreign government or governments, plural, who is telling you that there is a fake emergency that only exists in his head at the southern border, and this emergency consists of 4,000 families. And yet I can show you that over 1 million people have died in this country because of lax gun laws over the last 10 years. And 20,000 more have committed suicide. And countless people no, I should say 750,000 have been brutally injured. 320,000, only 320,000 have been killed, and 20,000 have committed suicide. So you got 1.2 million people whose entire lives have been derailed or ended or somehow changed forever because we refuse to do a background check on somebody who wants to buy an Uzi. And today is the 1 year I will not call it an anniversary. You do not celebrate crap like this. I do celebrate these kids, though. I celebrate and you wonder, where does it come from? Where does all this toughness and all this, energy come from? It's them managing their grief. Friends of theirs ran interference and took 5 bullets, okay, to protect them. The grief is exponential. It is unbelievable. And then you've got Congress members like Lunatic Matt Gaetz in Florida, who mistreats and maligns the father of one of the girls who was killed in Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, because he wants to say that the real tragedy is at the border and not from actual, parents who lost their children to actual lack of gun laws. I don't know if you caught that little bit, but, I can play that for you, too. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, McCabe gives an interview to Scott Pelley from 60 Minutes and says he's the one that started the Russia investigation, and here's why. And he's written a whole book about these 8 days in May that are just, your hair will stand on end. And then, my God, you got this staring us down, that the president is going to put us into some sort of a constitutional crisis by the end of tomorrow. I swear. Oh, and then you have this poor congresswoman who's just also a freshman, who's been called out as being some anti-Semite and blah, 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 questioning Elliott Abrams, who created this mess in Central America.
Mary had a little lamb.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe it. Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
Breaking news, and it's news many have been waiting for in the Russia probe. A federal judge has just ruled, siding with special counsel Bob Mueller, ruling that Mueller has proved Paul Manafort lied to investigators in the midst of his cooperation deal. This is the case everyone's been talking about. We're going into our breaking coverage. A big win for Bob Mueller tonight. Bob Mueller's prosecutors, here's the takeaway, are no longer bound to any lighter sentence. That means former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort now faces the prospect of a much heavier jail sentence.
Bye-bye, dickhead. See you in Attica. Now, take me to jail. And, everybody, Paul Manafort's going to die in jail. Now, Paul Manafort's going to get a pardon, just like Elliott Abrams got a pardon. And Elliott Abrams was the architect of the exact problems that we have at the southern border. He is the one that was countenancing and advocating for these madmen in Central America who were massacring their own people all throughout the 1980s. In Nicaragua, in Panama with Noriega, in Guatemala, in El Salvador. I mean, all this crap that we're dealing with today is a result of U.S. foreign policy that was crafted and put together by the Council on Foreign Relations, the neocon faction. Okay, I know everybody loves Max Boot these days because Max Boot hates Donald Trump. Okay, great. and everybody likes Bill Kristol these days because Bill Kristol hates Donald Trump. I get that they're never Trumpers. I understand that. But they are neocons, and these are the people that were responsible for the debacle called Iran-Contra. These are the people that were responsible for the massacres, the absolute the mass murder of people in Guatemala, in Nicaragua, in Salvador, in Panama. I mean, honestly, you tell me, oh, we didn't know Manuel Noriega was a drug dealer. Oh, the hell you did. Of course you did. We didn't know that they were killing their people. Of course you did. And you were advocating for, because they're so afraid of the left. They're so afraid of the left. The left has always got to be slaughtered, killed, massacred, knocked out. Oh, no power of debate, no ballot box. If somebody gets elected in Central America that they don't like, that the neocons don't like, that the Council on Foreign Relations people don't like, and they're duly elected, legitimately, democratically elected, they stage a coup. They've been doing it since the 80s. This is our foreign policy, people. And now the sick thing is Elliot Abrams, last Friday, I think it was, he's now like our special envoy to freaking Venezuela. He's going to do it again in Venezuela. Oh, my God. All right. What's really important about this thing about Manafort is Manafort's going to get a pardon. And that reminds me that Elliot Abrams also got a pardon. See, Lawrence Walsh, who was the independent counsel in Iran-Contra, actually found Elliot Abrams guilty of major felonies. But Elliot Abrams took a plea deal from Lawrence Walsh. Lawrence Walsh is the Mueller of the 80s, okay? He's an unbelievably gifted prosecutor, and I have spoken to him many times over the years. The Iran-Contra report, just so you know, is 12 volumes. You will never get through all of it, ever, never, even if you really, really wanted to. But I will just tell you that if you do want to know about it, Lawrence Walsh wrote a book about it. You can get it on Amazon, I'm sure, and you should read it. And you will understand how everything comes back to roost. Everything comes home to bite you in the ass. You do stuff, and then years later, you're suffering because you did it. And these are the people that deny, A, that they had anything to do with it, B, cop pleas, C, get pardons, and then what did Mark Twain say? History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. And now we're looking at Elliot Abrams sitting there all over again, and he's going to be, be the guy on Venezuela, and made it perfectly clear, and Donald Trump has made it perfectly clear that he's going to brutalize Venezuela, an oil-rich state. You don't fight wars and not take the oil, right? Right. All right. Manafort is going to get a pardon. I just want to prepare you for that harsh reality. The reason, I'm watching all the pundits yesterday. I'm telling you, everybody lied. Everybody lied. Carter Page lied. George Papadopoulos lied. The campaign manager of the Trump campaign, Manafort, lied. Then he was offered a deal to take years off of a prison sentence. And he lied during the deal. Rick Gates lied, but he is cooperating. Okay, that's the deputy campaign manager. The national security advisor to Donald Trump, Michael Flynn, he lied. And they're all sitting there yesterday, and they're all trying to figure out, why did they lie? Why did they lie? Why did they lie? Well, they lied because they were enriching themselves. They thought that Donald Trump would have their back and that if they ever got into trouble, he would pardon them. And some of them didn't want to sit and wait it out in jail. Manafort was willing to do it. Manafort, don't you find it crazy that Manafort looks just like Paulie? He looks just like him. I mean, it's crazy. Paul Sorvino played Paulie. Yeah, he looks just like, it's creepy. But anyway, McCabe actually wrote a book about what happened after Donald Trump removed James Comey, because James Comey was hip to what was going on. He understood that something illegal, something untoward, something that needed investigation, required him to be on that. And Comey got fired for that Rusher thing. Remember the Rusher thing? Yeah, and so as soon as Comey got fired for the Rusher thing and said that, McCabe, who was acting director of the FBI, because Comey was the director of the FBI and he was fired, so McCabe became the acting director. McCabe was called up by the president And the president wanted to know, everybody hated Comey. So how are things over at the FBI? Are they partying in the hallways? Aren't they glad that I got rid of him? And so this is the excerpt from McCabe's new book called Threat, that remembers that day, the day that Donald Trump called him up after he fired Comey. And it explains why McCabe did what McCabe did. Now, when you hear the name McCabe, remember there's a propaganda station, there's a propaganda channel, there's propaganda radio, there's propaganda right-wing, lunatic conservative YouTubes and Alex Jones's crowd and the Roger Stone crowd, and then there's, the Matt Getz crowd and the Freedom Crackers crowd, and then there's the Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Lala Ingram crowd. Okay, and they've all lied about Andy McCabe and made him into some criminal. Andrew McCabe, acting director of the FBI, was completely and wholly entitled to tell the newspapers anything he felt like telling them. Now, he authorized a leak to the Wall Street Journal. This is why Andy McCabe is gone. That's the crime. And there is no crime. And we know there is no crime because, listen, many people have asked James Comey whether or not what McCabe did was a crime, okay?
Andrew McCabe was raked across the coals in this Inspector General report. We're now told today that it has in a criminal referral to a U.S. Attorney's Office. McCabe's lawyer says he doesn't think that Andrew McCabe will end up being charged here.
Right.
But this all stems from an incident in which Mr. McCabe was involved in talking to the press about the Clinton investigation, how it was being handled by DOJ and FBI. He says everything he did was within his job description. It was to preserve the public standing of the FBI. Mm-hmm. He says it was all authorized. Clearly, the Inspector General doesn't agree with him on that. While you were director of the FBI and he was your deputy, was there clarity under your leadership about talking to the press, about the issue of leaks, about who could authorize people to discuss things with reporters?
I think so. There were two people who could authorize disclosures, the director and the deputy director. So Andy had the authority to speak to the media and to authorize communications with the media.
Do you think he improperly spoke to the media in that capacity then?
I don't know for sure. I know that he didn't tell me about it, didn't ask me about it before he did it. I think the Inspector General's report is right in that respect, and I would have expected that. But I think he had the authority to do that. And I think if he were here, he might say, well, I didn't need to talk to the boss because I had the authority to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard one, because given all that was going on at that point in time, I would have expected him to talk to me. But I think as a matter of rule, he had the authority.
That's his big crime, something he had the authority to do. And the reason why Andy McCabe was fired like 5 seconds before his retirement package kicked in after, 25 years, 30 years at the FBI, was to make an example of him so that Donald Trump could put fear into the heart and denigrate and literally destroy the reputation of the FBI. All right, so here's what McCabe writes in his book. This is just an excerpt. This is thanks to The Atlantic, the magazine The Atlantic. I love them. And it reads like this. On Wednesday, May 10th, now Comey was fired on May 9th, okay? On Wednesday, May 10th, 2017, my first full day on the job as acting director of the FBI, I sat down with senior staff involved in the Russia case, the investigation into alleged ties between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Okay, side note from me, there was no special counsel at this point. There was an ongoing counterintelligence investigation into the President of the United States and his campaign. As the meeting began, my secretary relayed a message. The White House was calling. The President himself was on the line. I'd spoken with him the night before in the Oval Office when he told me he had fired James Comey. A call like this was highly unusual. Presidents do not typically call FBI directors. There should be no direct contact between the president and the director, except for national security purposes. The reason is simple. Investigations and prosecutions need to be pursued without a hint of suspicion that someone who wields power has put a thumb on the scale. The Russia team was sitting in my office. I took the call on an unclassified line, which was another strange thing. The president was calling on a phone that was not secure. The voice on the other end said, "It's Don Trump calling." I said, "Hello, Mr. President, how are you?" Apart from my surprise that he was calling at all and that he wasn't on a secure line, I was surprised that he referred to himself as Don. The president said, "I'm good, boy, it's incredible. It's such a great thing. People are really happy about the fact that the director's gone, and it's just remarkable what people are saying. Have you seen that? Are you seeing that too?" I received hundreds of messages from FBI people, how happy they are that I fired him. There are people that say things on the media. Have you seen that? What's it like there in the building? McCabe, this is what it was like. You could go to any floor and you would see small groups gathering in the hallways, some people crying. The overwhelming majority liked and admired Director Comey, his personal style, his integrity. Now we're laboring under the same dank gray shadow that had been creeping over Washington during the few months Donald Trump had been in office. I didn't feel like I could say any of that to the president on the phone, and I'm not sure I wanted to say that to him in person either, or that he would have cared. I told him that people here were very surprised, but they were going back to work. The president said he thought most people in the FBI voted for him. He thought 80%. He asked me again, as he had in his office, if I knew that Comey had told him 3 times that he was not under investigation. Then he got to the reason for his call. He said, "I really want to come over there. I want to come to the FBI. I want to show all my FBI people how much I love them. So I think maybe it would be good for me to come over and speak to everybody, like tomorrow or the next day." That sounded to me like one of the worst possible things that could happen. He was the boss and he had every right to come, but I hoped the idea would dissipate on its own. He said, "Why don't you come down here and talk to me about this later?" We agreed on a time to meet. The president began to talk about how upset he was that Comey had flown home on a government plane from Los Angeles. Comey had been giving a speech there when he learned he was fired. Yes, on the television. Remember that? And the president wanted to know how that happens. I told him the bureau lawyers had assured me there was no legal issue with Comey coming home on the plane. I decided that he should do so. The existing threat assessment indicated Comey was still at risk, so he needed a protection detail. And since the members of the protection detail would all be coming home, it made sense to me to bring everybody back on the same plane they had used to fly out there. They were all coming back anyway. The president flew off the handle. "That's not right. I don't approve of that. That's wrong." And he reiterated that point 6 or 7 or 5 or 7 times. I said, "I'm sorry that you disagree, sir, but it was my decision and that's how I decided." The president said, "I want you to look into that." And I thought to myself, what am I going to look into? I just told you I made that decision. The ranting against Comey spiraled, so I just waited until he talked himself out. Toward the end of the conversation, the president brought up the subject of my wife. Wait till you hear what he said to him. This is disgusting. And how this president, who says, back in the old days, you punch him in the face and I'll get you oh my God, how McCabe kept his composure through this conversation, I have no idea. He said, toward the end of the conversation, the president brought up the subject of my wife. Jill had run unsuccessfully for the Virginia State Senate back in 2015. And the president had said false and malicious things about her during his campaign in order to tarnish the FBI. He said, "How's your wife?" I said, "Fine." He said, "When she lost her election, that must have been tough to lose. How'd she handle losing? It's tough to lose, isn't it?" I replied, "I guess it's tough to lose anything, but she rededicated herself to her career and her job taking care of kids in the emergency room. That's what she does." And he replied in a tone that sounded like a sneer, "Yeah, that must have been really tough to lose, to be a loser." Oh my God. He sat there and called the acting director of the FBI's wife a loser to his face. So McCabe said, I wrote a memo about this conversation that very day. I wrote memos about my interactions with President Trump for the same reason that Comey did, to have a contemporaneous record of conversation with a person who cannot be trusted. People don't appreciate how far we've fallen from normal standards of presidential accountability. Today, we have a president who is willing not only to comment prejudicially on criminal prosecutions, but to comment on the ones that potentially affect him. He does both of these things almost daily. He is not just sounding a dog whistle. He is lobbying for a result. The president has stepped over a bright ethical line and moral lines whenever he has encountered them. Every day brings a new low, with the president exposing himself as a deliberate liar who will say whatever he pleases to get what he wants. If he were on the box at Quantico, he would break the machine. Lie detector. After Comey's firing, the core of my concern had to do with what might happen to Russia, if the Russia case, if I were to be removed. I convened a series of meetings about that investigation, including the one interrupted by the call from the president, in which I directed an overall review of every aspect. Was the work on solid ground? Were the individuals on whom we should consider opening new cases? I wanted to protect the Russia investigation in such a way that whoever came after me could not just make it go away. As requested, I went back to the White House that afternoon. The scene was almost identical to the one I had walked into the previous night. Trump was behind the resolute desk. He lifted one arm and jutted it out, fingers splayed, directing me to take a seat in one of the little wooden chairs in front of him. Reince Priebus, the chief of staff, the guy who changed the platform, and Don McGahn, then the White House counsel, were in the other chairs. The president launched back into his speech about what a great decision it was to fire Jim Comey, how wonderful it was that the director was gone because so many people didn't like Comey, even hated him. The president actually used the word hate. Eventually, he changed the subject. He said that he wanted to come to FBI headquarters to see people and excite them and show them how much he loves them. This is sick. He pressed me to answer when if I thought it was a good idea. So I said it was always a good idea to visit. I was trying to take some immediacy out of his proposal to communicate that the door was always open, so he wouldn't feel he had to crash through it right away. I knew what a disaster it could turn out to be if he came to the Hoover building in the near future. You know, people were grieving the loss of Comey, right? He pressed further, asking specifically, do you think it would be a good idea for me to come down? Do you think it would be a good idea for me to come down now? I said, sure. Then he looked at Don McGahn, and the president said, Don, what do you think? You think I should go down to the FBI? You think I should speak to the people? McGahn was sitting on one of the wooden chairs to my right, making eye contact with Trump, he said, in a very pat and prepared way. If the acting director of the FBI is telling you he thinks it's a good idea for you to come visit the FBI, then you should do it. Then McGahn turned and looked at me, and Trump looked at me and asked, is that what you're telling me? Is that what you're telling me? Do you think it's a good idea? It was a very bizarre performance. So I said, it'll be fine. I had no real choice. This was not worth the ultimate sacrifice, meaning a showdown with the president. In this moment, and this is unbelievable, in this moment, I felt the way I felt in 1998 in a case involving the Russian mafia. I met a man I'll call Big Felix. I sent a man, Big Felix, in to meet with a mafia boss named Dmitry Gufeld. The same kind of thing was happening here, except in the Oval Office. Dmitry had wanted Felix to endorse his protection scheme, saying, this is a dangerous business. It's a bad neighborhood. And, you know, if you want, I'll protect you from that. If you want my protection, I'll protect you. Do you want my protection? The president and his men were trying to work me the way a criminal brigade would operate. Meaning, he's asking the acting director, McCabe, You want my protection? You want my protection? I want to come down to the FBI. I want to talk to these people. I want to get them on my side. I want to get them on my side. I want to tell them whatever they need to hear to get them on my side. And then he says, for whatever reason, the visit to the FBI never happened. On one of the regularly scheduled meetings with the Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, and some of their staff came 2 days later on Friday, March 12th. After the meeting, I asked the deputy, Rod Rosenstein, if he could stay behind. In part, I wanted to talk to him about the ground rules governing the separate investigations of the Russia case brought by the FBI and the Senate Intelligence Committee. They wanted to know, he wanted answers about, were they going to keep it separate? Were they going to, what were they doing? Rosenstein, of course, had oversight because he was the Attorney General at the time. Jeff Sessions had to recuse himself owing to his own interactions with Russians during the campaign. But my main message was, I need you to protect this process. After speaking to these points, Rod shifted his gaze. His eyes were focused on a point in space, a few yards beyond and behind, toward the door. He started talking about the firing of Jim Comey. He was obviously upset. He said he was shocked that the White House was making it look as if Jim's firing had been his idea. He was grasping for a way to describe the nature of his situation. And one remark stands out. He said, "There is no one I can talk to about this. There is no one here that I can trust." He asked for my thoughts about whether we needed a special counsel to oversee the Russia case. I said I thought it would help the investigation's credibility. Later that day, I went to see Rosenstein again. This is the gist of what I said. I feel strongly that the investigation would be best served by having a special counsel. I've been thinking about the Clinton email case, and I remember how we got twisted in knots over how to announce a result that did not include bringing charges against anyone. Had we appointed a special counsel in the Clinton case, we might not be in the present situation. Unless and until you make the decision to appoint a special counsel, the FBI is going to be the subject of withering criticism that could destroy both the Department of Justice and the FBI. Rosenstein was very engaged. He wasn't yet convinced. I brought the matter up again with him after the weekend. On Wednesday, we briefed the Hill. As I saw it, by informing Congress of the Bureau's actions, we'd be drawing an indelible line around the cases we had opened. The 4 cases known publicly and any others that had gone forward. The 4 cases that they had opened in the FBI prior to Mueller: Carter Page, a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign and a man with many Russian ties; George Papadopoulos, another foreign policy advisor who had told a foreign diplomat that the Russian government had offered to help Trump's campaign by giving dirt on Hillary Clinton; Michael Flynn, for a brief period, the president's national security advisor, who had pursued multiple high-level contacts with the Russian government; and Paul Manafort, Trump's campaign manager, who had shady business dealings with the Ukrainians and Russians. And you know what's interesting? This predates Mueller, and every one of them has pled guilty. Every last one of them. But Manafort believes he's getting a pardon, and that's why he continues to lie. This is the end of the chapter. He said, on the afternoon of May 17, Rosenstein and I sat at the end of a long conference table in a secure room in the basement of the Capitol. We were there to brief the so-called Gang of Eight, the majority and minority leaders of the House and the Senate, and the chairs and ranking members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. Rosenstein had, I knew, made the decision to appoint a special counsel. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic senator from New York, was to our right. Mitch McConnell, the Republican senator from Kentucky, and the Senate Majority Leader, was to our left. The mood was sober. After reminding the committee of how the investigation began, I told them of the additional steps we had taken. Then Rod took over the meeting and announced that he had appointed a special counsel to pursue the Russian investigation, and that the special counsel was Robert Mueller. The Gang of Eight had questions. What was the scope? Who would oversee the special counsel? How could the special counsel get fired? Rod Rosenstein answered every single question, and then it was over. When I came out of the Capitol, I felt like I had crossed the finish line. If I got nothing else done as acting director, I had done the one thing I needed to do. And then he was fired by Donald Trump for doing something he was wholly authorized to do, and that was to authorize communication with the Wall Street Journal's reporter about the Hillary Clinton email case at its conclusion. Because it was over. It was over by then, remember? It was over. The election had happened. The case was closed. They reopened it 11 days before the election, closed it again 2 days before the election. Comey was fired in May after the election, and this happened the day after, and the day after that, and the day after that, after Comey was fired. McCabe authorized his Justice Department, his FBI, to communicate with the Wall Street Journal after the investigation was closed, and he was fired for authorizing something that he was completely authorized to do. And that was to allow one of his agents or one of his press person to speak to a Wall Street Journal reporter about Hillary's email investigation and how they came to the conclusion that nobody had committed a criminal act. And there you have it, everybody. There you have it. Scott Pelley sat down this morning to talk about this interview that he has coming up this Sunday on 60 Minutes with Andrew McCabe. And he has additional details. Listen.
Gail, the most illuminating and surprising thing in the interview to me were these 8 days in May when all of these things were happening behind the scenes that the American people really didn't know about. There were meetings at the Justice Department in which it was discussed whether the vice president and a majority of the cabinet could be brought together to remove the president of the United States under the 25th Amendment. These were the 8 days from Comey's firing to the point that Robert Mueller was appointed special counsel. And the highest levels of American law enforcement were trying to figure out what to do with the president.
And I just want to put a finer point on that, because there has been reporting, but I don't believe there has been a source that went on the record to confirm that that 25th Amendment was discussed about removing the president. So McCabe is saying that that was discussed.
Absolutely. McCabe, Nora, as you point out, is the very first person involved in these meetings who has come out and spoken publicly.
That there was a discussion underway about removing the president of the United States.
They were counting noses. They were not asking cabinet members whether they would vote for or against removing the president, but they were speculating this person would be with us, that person would not be, and they were counting noses in that effort.
And this was not perceived to be a joke.
This was not perceived to be a joke.
Mm-hmm.
It was also said at a previous time that the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, offered to wear a wire into the White House to record potentially incriminating conversations with the president. A statement was released after that was never serious, it was sarcastic, etc. McCabe in our interview says no. It came up more than once, and it was so serious that he took it to the lawyers at the FBI to discuss it.
Sam, now, just remember there was an opinion piece in the New York Times. An anonymous person went to the New York Times and asked for anonymity, and the New York Times agreed after interviewing this person that this person was somebody in the West Wing of the White House, or in the East Wing of the White House, was somebody that worked in the White House, that was very high up, that was a senior official in the Trump administration, whose identity they knew, but we don't. Now, that op-ed was in the New York Times after Andy McCabe was fired. And you'll remember that in that opinion piece, this person who said, I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration, also says there was a 25th Amendment conversation and a wear a wire conversation.
This is The Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
I was speaking to the man who had just run for the presidency and won the election for the presidency, and who might have done so with the aid of the government of Russia, our most formidable adversary on the world stage. And that was something that troubled me greatly.
How long was it after that you decided to start the obstruction of justice and counterintelligence investigations involving the president?
I think the next day I met with the team investigating the Russia cases, and I asked the team to go back and conduct an assessment to determine where are we with these efforts and what steps do we need to take going forward. I was very concerned that I was able to put the Russia case on absolutely solid ground in an indelible fashion, that were I removed quickly or reassigned or fired, that the case could not be closed or vanish in the night without a trace. I wanted to make sure that our case was on solid ground, and if somebody came in behind me and closed it and tried to walk away from it, they would not be able to do that without creating a record of why they'd made that decision.
So what he did was, obviously, he begged Rod Rosenstein to consider appointing a special counsel. Thank God he did, because I don't know if you realize what Paul Manafort was actually convicted of. Paul Manafort was convicted on September 14th for, he pled guilty to conspiring to defraud the United States. There are other crimes he also committed. Lobbying laws were violated, the FARA law, obviously. Obstruction of justice and witness tampering in connection of with years of his relationship with Oleg Deripaska. But see, he did plead guilty to conspiracy to defraud the United States, Manafort did. Now, that is that's like, you're a traitor to your nation, okay? Everybody wants to, when is it treason, when isn't treason? Well, treason isn't a time of war, but to be a traitor to your nation. And, this brings us full circle about what we were talking about when we opened the show. So you have this young congresswoman named Ilhan Omar, who is a young Somali immigrant who... her family was involved in the civil war that broke out in Somalia due to no government. I have no government. I mean, this is what I always say. Libertarians love the idea of no government, no government. Go look at Somalia. That's what it looks like. Anyway, her family was caught up in this freaky civil war that was going on in Somalia, and they had to flee. And they fled Somalia, and they were able to get into Kenya because it's all in the North African continent. Or it's all on the African continent. So they fled Somalia, and they were able to get into Kenya, where they lived in a refugee camp, and then were able to apply for asylum and come to the United States. And this girl, who lived through all of that, is now a U.S. Congresswoman. That is the American dream. That is the story of America. America is not there's no such thing as an American unless you're a Native American. Everyone else is here from someplace else. America is an idea. It's a nation made up of people from all over this planet. And she is such a great example of what is possible here in this country if you can make it here and get asylum. So now she has an unfortunate tweet where she goes after AIPAC, which is a PAC. It's the American Israel Political Action Committee, AIPAC. It's a PAC. And you don't fool yourself. AIPAC is not a PAC that advocates for the Israeli population or American Jews that made it here, that, through the skin of our teeth, we're lucky to have our grandparents get here. No, or even to Israel in 1948 when it was first created. No, AIPAC is the Likud PAC. It is the uber right-wing PAC for the Benjamin Netanyahus of the world, okay? For the uber right-wing Likud party. And she dared to criticize them, and you cannot do that in America, as I've found out the hard way. You just can't do it. So she apologized, and her apology, was sincere. I'm an American Jew. I get that she didn't understand it because I didn't understand it either for the longest. And I won't talk about Israeli politics. You know why? There's no winning. You can't win a conversation on Israeli politics. Why? Because we're not there. We don't vote there. We don't have a voice there. We don't, but I just want you to know who she criticized. And you look at these political, PACs, you look at these organizations, the NRA is one of them. The NRA advocates for the not even studying the cost of gun violence in this country. God help you if you do, you will be attacked. Same thing with the right-wing PACs, okay? You can't attack them. And she found out the hard way. But she... And the president, honestly, to call her, the president's calling Ilhan Omar a freaking anti-Semite. This is a man who called for a ban on a complete and total shutdown of all Muslims. That would have included her family. This is a guy who tweeted out a picture of Hillary Clinton with the Star of David and money. And then said it was a sheriff's star, remember? Because it was obvious. This is a man who said that Nazis marching in Charlottesville, some of the Nazis, were very fine people. Please, I am not going to take my cues about who is and who is not anti-Semitic as an American Jew from Donald J. Trump. That's just a ridiculous proposition. But she got this great opportunity. She got to question the architect of the immigration debacle that we're suffering through with Central America. Elliot Abrams, who led these brutal dictators in Central America, in Guatemala, Salvador, freaking Honduras, Panama, Manuel Noriega. Oh, my God. And caused such an upheaval in that part of the world that we're still suffering through it. They're still paying for what America did in their backyard, for copping a squat and taking a poop on them. But she got to ask Elliot Abrams questions, and now she's under fire for this too. By who? By the neocons, the Max Boots and the Council of Foreign Relations and the Bill Cristols and all of them. Crazy.
Mr. Adams, in 1991, you pleaded guilty to 2 counts of withholding information from Congress regarding your involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, for which you were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question. That was not a question. That was I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was not a question.
Committee can attack
on February 8th,
who is not permitted to reply.
That was not a question. Thank you for your participation.
Oh, snap. See, this is exactly the way I talked to Oliver North the day that Oliver North dared to come into my studio. He did not know that I would question him this way. He just thought everybody on AM Talk Radio, which is where we were, was a conservative. He had no idea that I'd carved out a little island of sanity in between Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity. And he was in town for a Christian jamboree. And we booked him. And he came in and he got those kinds of questions. And now Elliot Abrams, who has just been picked by the Trump administration to be our envoy to Venezuela after he lied. You know, what Elliot Abrams pled guilty to in a plea deal with Lawrence Walsh, the special counsel in Iran-Contra, was lying to Congress. That's why she's asking him, why should I believe anything you say when you have this little habit of lying to Congress? So he was also charged with, he wasn't indicted. Instead, he entered into a plea deal, but he was being looked at for multiple felonies. And so he decided, I better plea. And the offer was made by Lawrence Walsh, the special prosecutor, to have Elliot Abrams plea down to simply lying to Congress. And that's what he did. And then he was pardoned by H.W. Bush. This was during the Reagan years, okay? This goes on.
On February 8th, 1982, you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda report about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. During that massacre, some of those troops bragged about raping a 12-year-old girl before they killed them. Girls before they killed them. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you still think so?
From the day that President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement.
Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and I
yes or no?
No.
I will take that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack, which is not a question.
Yes or no, would you support an armed faction within Venezuela that engages in war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide, if you believe they were serving U.S. interest, as you did in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua?
I am not going to respond to that question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you are sorry. You are really sorry. On December 11th, 1981, in El Salvador, a Salvadoran military unit that was created and trained by the United States Army started slaughtering everyone they could find in a little remote village in El Salvador called El Mozote. And before murdering these women and girls, the soldiers raped them repeatedly. Some of the children that were raped were as young as 10 years old. The soldiers joked that their favorite ones to rape were the 12-year-olds. There is a witness to this who said a soldier tossed a 3-year-old child into the air, impaling him on his bayonet. That day, 800 people were killed. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. 75,000 people in El Salvador died during this period of time because we trained these soldiers to, protect this dictator. Okay? It's a very sick story. However, El Salvador is a very, very small country. It's about the size of New Jersey. So if you have 75,000 dead people in New Jersey, that would be like 5 million people. Do you know what I'm saying? The next day, December 12th, that was the first day on the job for Elliott Abrams. He was Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs. And he decided to snap into action and cover up that massacre. He testified to the Senate, and this is why he had to plead guilty. He testified to the Senate that the stories of the El Mozote massacre that happened the day before was not credible, and the whole thing was made up, and that it was just propaganda, and it was propaganda by the anti-government guerrillas, and that they needed our help because look at the propaganda. Oh, that they're raping, but it happened. Last Friday, in this country, Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, decided Elliott Abrams should be America's special envoy for Venezuela, giving him the authority to be in charge of all things related to our efforts to restore democracy in this oil-rich nation. This is sending the message that we are going to brutalize you, Venezuela. The whole world knows what this message is. They're going to start to, we have this undying love for democracy while they stage some sort of a coup. And Elliott Abrams is going to become the champion of human rights around the globe. And let me tell you something. He participated in some of the most grotesque acts of U.S. foreign policy over the past 40 years. And constantly proclaims that it's all about democracy. It's all about human rights. Let me tell you something. Central America was such a key focal point for Ronald Reagan. Guatemala in particular, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Isn't it something that is where we're seeing all the caravans come from now? Gee, small world, isn't it? Just a coincidence, I guess. Every one of those countries has been dominated by a tiny, cruel group of elites, white elites, since their founding, with over 100 years of help from U.S. interventions there. Every country that I just talked to you about, every one of them, the ruling families looked at the people of El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Guatemala as this. The Intercept has the best article about this because this is their quote, and it rings so true for me. And you know that I know that part of the world like intimately. All right, that these ruling families that were propped up by the United States all these years viewed their people as human-shaped animals. These people are the salt of the earth. They are the hardest working people. But they were worked to death on coffee plantations. They watched their children die of easily treatable diseases. Most of them just kept their heads down. Some of them took up arms. And anyone who stood against these ruling elites that were working these people to death, that were letting their children die, anyone that stood up to their brutality was called a communist by our government. A freaking communist. And in the name of fighting communism, we trained these elite families' armies to go out and slaughter these human-shaped animals that dared to not keep their heads down. You had Catholic priests reporting that peasant women left 3 small children, in the care of the mother and the sister, and when she came back, all 5 of them had been decapitated by the Salvadoran National Guard. Their decapitated bodies were positioned sitting around a table. Their hands were placed on their heads in front of them as though they were stroking their own heads. And the toddler's head kept slipping off because it was so small. So they nailed the toddler's head onto the toddler's corpse. And at the center of the table with all these decapitated family members was a bowl of blood. And the U.S. was supporting these mafia-like families, these oligarchies in El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras. And let me tell you something. Some of these leaders that we protected, they've been convicted of genocide after we helped them stay in power. This is disgusting. Buy a stinking podcast.